By the early 2000s, the Dragon Ball brand had already begun snowballing into a worldwide phenomenon, but the franchise was still struggling to find its identity within the video game medium. It was on the Sony PlayStation 2 where Dragon Ball Z games really came into their own in a big way. And in no series was this more apparent than the trilogy that would become the cornerstone of what people would expect for every Dragon Ball Z game that followed. Dragon Ball Z, the Budokai Trilogy. 3 games that set the standard and improved on their own formula with every new entry. And yet this trilogy was still able to carve out a name for itself in the hearts of 5th generation console owners all over the globe. So what was it that made these games so special? Well, let's take a look at the Budokai Trilogy, starting with the game that kicked it all off, Dragon Ball Z Budokai. Though often forgotten about in modern dialogues about the different games based on the popular anime, Dragon Ball Z Budokai is 100% one of the most important Dragon Ball Z games ever released, specifically because it's the first game most of us here in North America ever got the chance to see or play. Until this game released on December 4th, 2002, the only Dragon Ball related games available to North American audiences were Dragon Ball Z The Legacy of Goku for the Game Boy Advance, which released earlier that same year, and Dragon Ball GT Final Bout for the Sony PlayStation. So this is, realistically speaking, the first real Dragon Ball Z video game most people even had the chance to play here. Thanks to American publisher Infro Games, Budokai was made available to Western audiences to enjoy and only helped aid in the franchise's momentous rise to global popularity. Probably the most recognizable aspect of this North American release at the time was that it's the first ever Dragon Ball Z game to utilize the same voice actors from the Funimation dub of the anime. By this point, the iconic voices of Chris Sabat and Sean Schmiel had become as synonymous with Western audiences' idea of the characters as something like David Hayter in Solid Snake or Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible.
After all those innocent lives you took, you want me to spare you? Why should I give you the mercy you've never shown anyone?
So when Infro Games got the Funimation actors on board to dub the Western release of the game, it really helped solidify this as a genuine adaptation of the exciting anime that we'd all become so attached to at the time. Although Budokai was developed and released initially for the Sony PlayStation 2, it was refined and ported to the Nintendo GameCube a year later. The only real difference between the two versions being the inclusion of cel-shaded technology on the GameCube release. Well, that and the case of the GameCube version displayed the Atari logo as the publisher due to Infro Games changing their name to Atari following a merger between the companies. For this video, I'm going with the PS2 release as that's the way I first experienced the game back in the day. As you are seeing on the screen, Budokai features a 100% true 3D gameplay experience with fully rendered models for every character and 3D backgrounds to fight on. While this isn't exactly groundbreaking in comparison to a lot of the other fighting games back then, it's only the second attempt from the franchise at adopting a fully 3D video game, the first being the much maligned Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. So getting to boot up and play a fully 3D DBZ fighting game that actually functions was pretty novel at the time of its release. The original Budokai was by all means the cornerstone for what would become one of the most prolific and successful Dragon Ball video game franchises, and really drew the blueprint that several later entries would continue to refine. So I'm excited to have you join me as we get into it and break down what makes Dragon Ball Z Budokai so special. Now, normally in my retrospectives, I dedicate this section to extensively examining the game's plot progression, narrative, and overall storyline. However, this game, like most Dragon Ball games, just retells the same story from the anime. So for this video, I'm changing it up a bit. Rather than just retell the whole plot of the anime, but essentially in the form of a game, we'll be looking at how the game handles the different battles it does adapt, what it changes, what it adds, what it leaves out, and overall what it does right. The thing I find the most interesting about the story mode in Budokai is that it's split into 2 different parts for some reason, and you don't really know that about it going in. In fact, I was so confused by this that when I played through the first part of the story mode, I was constantly thinking to myself how weird some of the decisions of what battles to cover were. More on that as we progress. One of the coolest things about owning a copy of Budokai back in the day was that you essentially owned a way to experience the whole anime from the Saiyan saga all the way to the end of the Cell Game saga. I'd even go as far as to say you'll spend more time watching cutscenes in the story mode than you will actually just playing the game itself. Because before and after pretty much every battle, you're treated to a fully 3D rendered rendition of all of the biggest moments from the anime. The team behind Budokai clearly wanted to offer players a way to genuinely feel as if they were really playing through the show itself, which, let me tell you, a lot of you watching may not even know what this sensation I'm about to describe to you is. But there is a reason being able to play through the anime like this mattered back in 2002. There were no streaming services or Blu-ray collections. If you wanted to watch Dragon Ball Z, pretty much the only thing you could do was try to be in front of your television when Toonami happened to be airing an episode of DBZ for you to watch. You couldn't decide when you watched it, and you couldn't decide where in the anime you were watching, which meant that growing up, lots of us missed out on entire seasons of the show. The other way you could potentially watch Dragon Ball Z was by getting your hands on one of the VHS home video releases of it. These were pretty common, at least where I was from, but if you did manage to get one of them, they'd only have 3 episodes per tape. So I did manage to collect a good dozen or so of these tapes thanks to my very understanding parents, but again, that equates to like less than 50 episodes, if I'm assuming I had more than 12. Not to mention, only a few of them were actually in order, much less in the same saga. I had mostly tapes from the Buu sagas, with a few from the Android saga. No Cell, no Frieza, no Saiyan. I'd say a little less than half of them were from GT as well, because that's what was being pushed in the US at the time. All of that is to say that I, like I assume millions of other kids, got the majority of their understanding of the Dragon Ball Z show from playing these games. They filled in blanks that we hadn't actually seen ourselves. So the fact that the team put this much time into making these cutscenes look so polished is very much appreciated from someone like me who grew up with things like this. Back to the game, I hope you'll notice just how well this game holds up graphically. I mean, it's probably due to the art style, but I feel like this game looks damn good. The character models are all designed in a way that lets them feel like they were kind of ripped out of the pages of the manga and made 3D. It's really cool, at least to me. As I mentioned earlier, this game tells its story across 2 parts, the first part being centered nearly exclusively around battles involving Goku. This is where I want to talk about those strange decisions I mentioned earlier. So, when you start the story mode, it just kind of throws you into the Saiyan Saga, which is great, and you battle Raditz as Goku for your first fight. Helps you learn the controls, familiarize yourself with the flow of combat, etc. But then after you beat that fight, something weird happens. You have to play a minigame. What you're seeing on the screen is me holding Raditz still while Piccolo charges his special beam cannon. You have to use rotations of the analog stick to keep him still while Goku holds him. Okay, minigames are fun sometimes. What's weird about that, you ask? Well, I'll tell you, it never happens again. Throughout the entire rest of this first part of the story mode, not only do you never play this particular minigame again, there are no more minigames, period. What's even weirder is that there is one more instance of this minigame after you beat the first part of the story mode. When you go to part 2 of the story, it lets you play this whole scenario from Piccolo's perspective, and you have to charge your special beam cannon in a certain amount of time. It's another minigame in the same context as the last one, but with slightly different execution. And after this, once again, you never see another minigame. This is so weird to me. There's 2 minigames, only 2, and they both happen at the start of each story mode part and only involve the death of Raditz. The only reason for this that I can muster is that this game was expecting to be in development for longer and cut some things to make its release window. I mean, that's why I figure it only goes up to the Cell Game saga in its story. The whole series had resolved by this point, so it's not like they didn't know about Buu, and there's art in the game that shows the fight between Goku and Majin Vegeta. So yeah, I'm figuring this little minigame is a relic from when the developers were hoping to add more throughout the game, but ended up cutting them. There's more strange decisions, however, like why did they bother cutting the story mode into 2 parts like this? So when you play the first part of the story, it just takes you automatically through only Goku's scenarios. Before I realized that there was going to be more story unlocked, I was playing through this part utterly perplexed.
What? Jump!
You fight Raditz, then Nappa, then Vegeta, all as Goku. I thought I was figuring it out by this point since we skipped the non-Goku fights, but then all of a sudden we get a mission playing as Gohan against Vegeta. Okay, so we are doing non-Goku encounters because I'm playing as Kid Gohan right here. But then we go right back to Goku again. And they have us play through multiple battles, training us on different techniques using Goku's training on the way to Namek as the explanation. But this totally skips all of the conflicts Vegeta, Gohan, and Krillin faced while on Namek. We've seen they'll let us play as Gohan, so why not now?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know we were starting. Here, allow me.
Well, we only play Goku's battles through the entire Namek saga, and into the Android saga where we get to play as Piccolo fighting Cell in Android 17. Okay, why? You haven't let us play as Piccolo one time so far, but now all of a sudden we can? Okay, I thought to myself, well, we're definitely going to play as Goku and Gohan training in the hyperbolic time chamber. Nope, we skip straight to the Cell games. We fight Cell as Goku once, then as Gohan 3 times as the cutscenes retell the story from the show. Which, I mean, yeah, that makes sense to let us play as Gohan for this part, but why did we play as him in the Sand Saga one time, then not once between these two instances? Of course, after beating the game and watching the credits roll, you unlock the second part of the story, which fills in a bunch of those gaps. You can go back in and play as Piccolo against the Saiyans, then as Vegeta during the Namek Saga, where we get to fight Zarbon, Recoome, and Frieza. Then the Android Saga gives us the Vegeta fights against 19, 18, and Cell, where we even see Super Vegeta's transformation. It's not all of the relevant fights, but it feels a lot closer to what I was expecting going in. Of course, my big question is, why did they do this? Why did they cut it into 2 parts like this? If it was only Goku and Gohan's perspectives in the first part, I think I would have understood a little better. But then we also play as Piccolo in the first part. And it's not like the 2 parts are in any way equal in length. The first part took me roughly 2.5 hours to complete, while the second part ran me just over an hour and 15. Which means if they had moved the Piccolo fights from the Android Saga from the first part into the second part like the Piccolo fights in the Saiyan Saga, that would have balanced things out a lot more. If anyone down in the comments has any idea or insight as to why they broke the campaign up like this, please help me out here. The presentation of the story mode is pretty cool, honestly, as each saga is treated like its own season, and each fight like its own episode. They even name the episodes and give them neat little titles like you'd see in the anime. After you beat one of the seasons, you're given a little end video with what to expect from the next one. And they even have the same narrator doing the voiceovers like in the show. It's really a spectacular way to tell this story. The last thing I want to say about the story mode is that each season also ends on a what-if scenario regarding the villain of that arc. In the Saiyan Saga, we end on a what-if Vegeta beat Goku, and we get to play as Vegeta basically annihilating Goku, Gohan, and Krillin. Then he gets mad about having to kill Nappa and turns Super Saiyan. Okay, yeah, that bit is pretty forced. The Namek Saga What If has Frieza actually beating Super Saiyan Goku, and then getting to the Namekian Dragon Balls in time to wish himself immortality. Then we see him blow up a galaxy and head towards Earth to blow it up as well. Then, lastly, we get a Cell What If, where we play as Cell fighting the androids to become perfect, only for him to nearly absorb 18 when...
No, not you! What are you doing? No! That freak is gonna pay for what he did to Krillin!
Yeah, I gotta give them props on creativity. This is something I'd have never thought of. We play as Cell absorbing Krillin, which made him significantly weaker somehow. We then fight Yamcha and Tien, who give us some real trouble. This is all before Cell suddenly wakes up, revealing it all to be a dream as he waited to fight in his own Cell games. This doesn't really make sense though, because Cell absorbs literally hundreds of people throughout the show, and it all only boosts his power. I don't think this would even happen. Maybe they're implying it's different if he opens his tail? I'm not sure. I don't think it works like a fusion as this game is suggesting, but who cares? It's hilarious. We gotta talk about the cutscenes now. I've been bringing them up a lot. For what we're working with here, these cinematics are really impressively handled. Like I mentioned before, the choreography and cinematography is well done and reflects the show appropriately. There are a few issues here though, mainly the facial animations and close-ups. Sometimes the camera will do a close-up of just a character's mouth, but the mouth and models in general aren't really like the most impressive ever. I mean, they're polygonal models on a PS2 in 2002. It's probably not a great idea to get super close to these models. As for the facial animations, they're passable most of the time, but every now and then, they'll let out a scream or something, and, well, you get one of these comedy gold bits I've been playing every so often. Overall, I really feel like this was a critical turning point for Dragon Ball games, because during that time, there was nothing even close to what this game offers. A true way to experience the events of the anime through a series of well-animated cutscenes featuring the voice cast we all already knew and loved. More importantly, the chance to play through all of the most iconic battles of the series ourselves, and even experience a healthy dose of what-if scenarios to chew on. The story mode here still holds up pretty well, and I'm happy to attest to its aging even better. While I don't know if I'd recommend it over some of its successors, it's still definitely one of the best Dragon Ball Z campaigns available. The single biggest downside, I'd say, is the total absence of the Buu sagas. While I acknowledge that they're not everyone's favorite, they are mine, and some of the coolest and most memorable moments didn't even occur until then, leaving this game feeling totally incomplete and like it's missing an entire final act. That is what I would say is really holding this story mode back, in my opinion. All in all, still a great way to experience the Dragon Ball Z game. After completing the game's story mode, we've got a handful of other offerings to examine, the most important of those being the World Martial Arts Tournament mode. It's what it sounds like. The game randomly selects a handful of contestants and pits them against each other in a series of increasingly more difficult bouts. Honestly, the menu design for the whole thing is fantastic. I love how polished it all feels, and the execution is even pretty good. When you first boot up the game, you only have access to the first of 3 categories, that being Novice. The Novice category contains 3 battles, all of which you have to beat in order to win the tournament and secure your 10,000 zenny. The purpose of that 10,000 zenny will be covered later. Now, I expected to play through this mode, unlock the next mode, and proceed from there. Well, to my surprise, following my completion of the Novice tournament, the remaining 2 tournaments were still locked. Turns out you have to go to Budokai's in-game shop and buy the other 2 tournament categories, which is what the 10,000 zenny we just won is for. Oh man, I need to talk about this in-game shop. It's so awful, and almost everything in the game is locked behind this shop, and almost all of it is only obtainable randomly. Mr. Popo's shop provides a handful of different options, but the only one that really matters is the bottom option, the Recommended tab, and we'll get to the character customization in a minute. You have to go through this shop for everything, including the other 2 World Tournament categories we need. Here's the thing, they don't appear as purchasable options until after you've beaten the story mode, both parts of it. So when I beat part 1 and the credits rolled, I thought I was done and went to play this mode next, only to realize I couldn't advance past the Novice category. So I was pretty confused as to what was going on. After I realized there was essentially a whole second part of the story mode, I went back in and played through all of that. Then wouldn't you know it, the Adept Tournament category was suddenly purchasable. So I got that, went back in, and started the grind of that mode. It's pretty much the same as the Novice category, exception being that we now must progress through 4 fights rather than 3. Also, it pays more zenny, 25,000 to the winner instead of 10,000. A pretty substantial increase for a single additional fight. As you're seeing on screen, I played through these with a few different characters, but Vegeta is obviously my favorite character, so I tend to lean heavy on him when I play a Dragon Ball game. Once we complete the Adept category, we can head back to Popo's shop, and lucky us, the Advanced category is now available, along with the other game mode called The Legend of Hercule. We'll get to that later as well. The Advanced category is the final and hardest of the tournaments, and features 5 total battles with a reward of 50,000 zenny. So if you just love the character customization of this game, you can play through this mode a few times to get rich on zenny. If you're good at the game, that is. I did manage to beat the Advanced tournament, but I'll be blunt, it was a very frustrating endeavor. Full disclosure, I'm not like the best fighting game player out there. I'm good enough to play through the games I enjoy and have a good time, but I'd be slaughtered by anyone who actually knows what they're doing in a fighting game. So that being said, I really have no idea if this game is actually good or not. Like, I know I have a lot of fun when the game is on easier levels, but when the difficulty increases to a certain degree, it feels like I can't actually even play it sometimes. I get locked into combos or forced into situations where it feels like I couldn't have gotten out of it. I even started to feel like the game is reading my inputs to react at times, like when you're on the floor waiting for your character to get up and you're mashing the move you want him to make when he finally does get up, then the AI reacts perfectly as if it knew exactly what you were going to do and counters it. It's incredibly frustrating, but again, I am open to the possibility that I'm just not as proficient in this game's mechanics as I'd need to be to handle these moments. Okay, so we've beaten all 3 available World Tournament modes. What's next? Well, we need to talk now about the character customization. Budokai features a mode where the player can collect all kinds of different items, skills, and attacks, then create their theoretically ideal iteration of their favorite character. This is pretty much the primary purpose for Popo's in-game shop. All of these skills and items are locked behind this shop, and pretty much all of them have to be obtained by what is essentially gambling. Not gambling with real money, mind you, but you basically have to just keep either buying items or buying random capsules, hoping that you get a good item. And there are so many items. I'm pretty sure you can have up to 9 of all of the same of most of these items, which means you have to just keep buying or sifting through the same low-tier skills over and over. There is something of an exploit available where you can just back out of the shop and go back into it over and over until you get the items you want. But let me just say, that is utterly exhausting. I want to emphasize that word too. Exhausting. Which brings me to the Dragon Balls. Yeah, this game features a mechanic where you can find and collect all 7 Dragon Balls, then summon Shenron to grant a wish. Which, I mean, that's a really cool idea. I love that. The true spirit of the show, you know? Guess how you find them? Yeah, we have to just hope they appear in Popo's shop. To add on to that, I'm pretty confident my game just straight up glitched out and won't give me the last damn Dragon Ball I need. I secured all 6 of the others within roughly a 30-minute period the first night I played this. And then spent, I am not kidding, hours on top of hours over the next 2 days after that, trying over and over to get it to give me that last Dragon Ball. I even started buying all of the cheap items, hoping I could just deplete the shop of literally anything else to sell me, which I read online you can do, but it was again just exhausting the hell out of me.
Welcome. Also, thank you for buying. Come again. Welcome. Also, bye-bye. Welcome. I'll sell you all. Bye-bye. Welcome. I'll sell you. Thank you for buying. Come again. Welcome. I'll thank you for buying. Come again. Welcome. I'll bye-bye.
I still don't quite understand what was going on with the game, dude, but I got so frustrated that I just downloaded cheats into my emulator and basically forced the game to give me the damn Dragon Balls so I could summon Shenron and have footage of it for the video. You might be wondering what wishes you can get granted by the Great Green Dragon. What is our reward for slogging through that giant misstep of a mechanic? Well, you can pick one of 3 randomly chosen characters to have a breakthrough capsule, which essentially just means that character will have access to all of their moves at once, which is a cool feature since normally you couldn't have all of them at once as there aren't enough item slots for the characters. The downside is that this one capsule takes up all of your available slots, so no senzu beans or armor or anything. So it is a neat idea. My only problem with this is that if by some horrifying chance my experience is at all indicative of what the average player experienced, then it's just not worth it. By the time you even got a breakthrough, much less grinded Shenron enough to get the breakthrough for the character you actually want, you'll have played the game so much it wouldn't even be fun anymore. You'll be over it, sick of it even. Just a half-decent idea for several mechanics that all collide in the most infuriating way imaginable for this game, man. And it's really a shame because I see what they were going for. Okay, with all of that said, let's talk about the hidden unlockable mode, The Legend of Hercule. This one is, well, interesting? Here's the breakdown. You've got 3 difficulties to choose from, just like the World Martial Arts Tournament: Novice, Adept, and Advanced. This determines how hard the AI will try to essentially demolish you because, full disclosure, this is the hardest mode in the game. You'll have to play as Hercule and fight through a series of characters without losing in order to complete the mode. That's 11 consecutive battles, each one with a different handicap to overcome to win. These handicaps range from slower charging ki to starting with way less health overall and all kinds of different things. I'm not even going to try and pretend here. This mode is brutal. It is probably the way to make the most zenny at once though, as after every battle you accumulate a bunch of points as seen here on screen, and if you actually finish the mode, those points are turned into zenny to spend at Popo's shop. The catch, of course, is that you can't spend it if you fail to beat the mode, which means you might get all the way to the last match, lose, and all of the points just disappear. This is incredibly frustrating. But I do see what they were going for with the challenge paying off with a big reward. It's a really bizarre mode, and it even comes complete with fully animated cutscenes and voice acting too. Like, this was really a mode they started, developed, and fully integrated into the game. It's not a bad mode, but I have to wonder, why was this implemented over something perhaps more fun? Maybe another minigame in the campaign, or another character or two to play with, or something. I don't hate the mode or anything, but I really don't feel like this game is polished enough to justify the time and resources that must have gone into designing and integrating this entire hidden game mode. I just don't get it. And the game really could have used another cool character or two, especially some cool hidden characters we can buy from the shop or something. I say that because the character roster here isn't exactly the most robust of the DBZ games out there. We of course have all of the usual suspects: Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, you get it. And to the game's credit, we do have access to all of the relevant characters found within the sagas the story covers. All included, we have a solid 23 character cast of characters to play with, which is nothing to scoff at, of course. That's a great lineup. That being said, this isn't like a Tekken situation where each character controls and handles specifically and uniquely. Rather, I think there's something like 3, maybe 4 real character fighting style templates just swapped out between character models. For instance, Goku and Piccolo share roughly the same moveset, so playing either of them is nearly an identical experience. Of course, they do have unique special moves, but those are really just differently animated variations of the same handful of attacks shared across every character. It's still great for what the game is. I'm not saying this as a criticism. I think it works great for the game as it is. My real criticism goes back to the Legend of Hercule game mode. I don't hate the mode or anything like that. I think it's a fun idea. But was this really a better use of resources than something else? I mean, we're only working with a 23 character roster. 21 if you account for the fact that 3 of those characters are just different iterations of Gohan. Which brings us to our big hidden unlockable character, the Great Saiyaman. I do think this is a really fun inclusion, but I mean, he's from the Buu era. This is the only character we get from the Buu era too, but that means the door was open to include Buu era characters, and the one we got was the Great Saiyaman. Do you see what I'm getting at? Instead of something like Vegito, we got the Legend of Hercule and the Great Saiyaman. Okay, yeah, maybe they wanted to save Vegito for the sequel. Fine. Maybe they wanted to save the whole Buu era. But why not give us some kind of really cool hidden character, like, I don't know, maybe Super Saiyan 3 or 4 Goku? I say this because for a while, there were some very pervasive rumors that Super Saiyan 3 or Super Saiyan 4 Goku were unlockable characters in this game. These rumors are totally untrue, of course, but they do reveal the issue that this game doesn't feature a really cool unlockable character. Our biggest unlockable hidden character is literally the Great Saiyaman, which is a joke. Before you come at me in the comments about Super Saiyan 4 Goku not having appeared in the US until after this game released, he was featured in Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, which was released for the PS1 in the United States like 5 years before this game was. Okay, maybe they really didn't want to dip into the Boo era, so then give me a movie character, like, how about Bardock?
There is nothing about this whole scenario that doesn't make me so disgusted I want to violently vomit out my own internal organs. I despise you both so intensely that I can't tell if my vision is blurry from my near-death experience or from my unforgiving rage. If allowed, once I am back to full health, I will gut you with an honest-to-God smile on my face, and then proceed to paint the home I built with your bodies with your fairy blood.
He was debuted in 1990, and the dub of his movie released in the US roughly 2 years before this game was released. I don't need a story mode for him or anything, but man, it would have been so cool to unlock Bardock here because well over half of the characters here are from the Saiyan and Namek sagas. So he would have fit in perfect here, aesthetically and tonally. A much more fitting character than the Great Saiyaman in my opinion, but what do I know? I'm just throwing out my thoughts on the matter with the massive benefit of hindsight, so take it all as you will.
Well fought! Huh, you freak!
That just about covers everything there is to know about Dragon Ball Z Budokai. What we've got here is a mixed bag in all honesty. There are some really cool aspects to this game that make it a really fun time, but layered in with that are some really bizarre design decisions that can definitely weigh the whole experience down. Before we wrap up, however, there's a few more things I want to go over. I want to take a look at the different cover arts we saw for Budokai back on release, and just give my amateur design opinions on them. So, Budokai, like a lot of games from that time, featured 3 different box arts for its 3 primary release regions: the US, Europe, and of course, Japan. First up is the US box art. Now, this one is super familiar to me, of course, because it's the one I remember seeing in my childhood. That dark red layer over the characters as Goku flies up front towards the logo. This is an awesome box art. It feels edgy and intense. Goku being in full color makes him stand out, and the red layer over the characters in the background helps to make the logo pop out even more. I love this artwork. I think they nailed the vibe of the game, and this probably secured a lot of sales back in the day. Awesome cover art. Then we have the European release box art, and as if to swing all the way to the other side of the spectrum, I hate this one. The background with Shenron feels super meek. The white Budokai logo is almost fading into the boring blue background. Goku is standing front and center on the box art, but he's in his base form and holding his staff from Dragon Ball, which isn't even in the game and serves to make the game feel even less exciting. Then they just shoved every character they could at the bottom and faded them into a similar gray-blue character design. Lastly, they dropped a thick white shadow around Goku's character to help him stand out because without it, he'd be hard to separate. This sucks, and I have no idea why it would be designed like this. And look at these character choices for the bottom. Is that Spopovich? The minor character who nearly beat Videl to death in the World Tournament? Why the hell is he on the cover art? Was he intended for the game at some point? He is another Boo art character. I don't understand. Why is he on there? Oh, looks like the European back cover shows a ton of Boo era characters, so they just didn't know the game they were making art for. Even if this art was good, it's literally inaccurate to the game, which is totally negligent marketing at best and downright false advertising at worst. Alright, enough of that. Let's look at the last artwork for the Japanese release. Damn, well drawn, minimalistic, epic. I like it.
Nice.
Alright, let's talk about the music of Budokai. There's a fairly strong collection of tracks here, all composed by Kenji Yamamoto. I would describe the OST as electronic rock music with strong orchestral elements. It's really fitting for the game, and the fight music can get you pretty pumped too. I like it overall, though I think it often fails to reach sufficient hype levels for the events we're seeing on screen. A lot of these tracks feel like they're just falling short of what they could be potentially. I know there's an immense amount of disagreement and drama surrounding the divisive Funimation score by Bruce Faulkner and Scott Morgan, but that music really set a standard for me about what Dragon Ball Z should sound like. Yeah, it's probably just nostalgia, but That music was so iconic. So the vibe we're getting here definitely falls short of what I think it could be. Not bad, but not the best either. That being said, there were a few instances where I noticed some of these songs sounding eerily similar to some other songs I'd heard before. Like, really, really close, actually. The one I really noticed is that one of the fighting songs is literally like 3 note changes away from just being Iron Man by Black Sabbath. As it turns out, Kenji Yamamoto has been accused of plagiarism, and not just for that song, but like multiple times, like a lot. I continued looking into it, and the dude straight up just ripped off dozens of American songs all throughout the 90s and early 2000s. I'm not going to play it all out here, but I'd encourage looking it up for yourself. It's honestly kind of hilarious to see just how closely he mimicked some of these songs. What is it about Dragon Ball composers and lawsuits around plagiarism? Bruce Faulkner had the same issue and even stole music from his own employees. Say what you will about Mark Menza, but at least his music is unique, iconic, and entirely his.
Step into the grand tour, Dragon Ball Z!
Dragon Ball Z Budokai sold very well, totaling 2.6 million copies in Japan and the United States between 2002 and 2006. It wasn't received quite as well as the developers might have hoped, however, stacking up a lot of 6s and 7s for the total Metacritic of 67% on the PS2 and 65% on the GameCube. It was successful enough to warrant a sequel though, and the studio continued on after its release. Budokai did eventually see a port/remaster for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 via the Budokai HD collection too. This collection included only the first and third entries of the Budokai Trilogy, choosing to omit the second. This version of both games featured a complete remaster into HD and adds in achievements and trophies for whichever system you purchased it for. The music is also completely overhauled, removing all of Kenji Yamamoto's work due to the aforementioned accusations of plagiarism and replacing it with music from later Dragon Ball Z games. Other than that, the remaster is very similar to its original PS2 and GameCube versions. Still a fine way to experience the game, but honestly, these aren't much more than glorified ports straight to 7th gen consoles. Dragon Ball Z Budokai is quite an interesting and unique experience. Between the really strange choices of how to tell its story, the odd game modes, and atrocious implementation of an in-game shop, there are some pretty drab aspects on offer here. That being said, there are a lot of really cool factors to consider as well, like the top-notch cutscenes, somewhat compelling combat, what-if scenarios, and really great voice acting. I wouldn't go so far as saying Budokai is some kind of lost or forgotten gem, but it is for sure among the stronger additions to the library of Dragon Ball Z games. And if that's enough for you to consider checking it out, then I'd say go for it. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 is what I call the forgotten Budokai game. It's not that people don't remember it, but more so that they just don't talk about it. Because of that, I went into the game expecting it to either be disappointing, droll, or just too similar to its predecessor to stand out. To my pleasant surprise, however, Budokai 2 kinda rocks. I'll get into the reasons why later in the video, but what I will say right now is that it is totally fair to call this game a better version of the first game. Part of the reason this is such a surprise to me is that while I did play the first Budokai in my youth, I never got to try this one. While it did nearly happen, circumstances didn't align and I just never got my hands on it. So this was my first time experiencing this one, and it had a lot more surprises in store for me than I think I was expecting. Budokai 2 was released in Europe and Australia in November and North America in December of 2003, roughly 1 year after the original Budokai had launched, and strangely enough, it launched in February of 2004 for Japanese audiences. I'm not sure why they delayed it like that either. I'd have expected it to launch there first, if anything. The same studio who developed the first game, Dimps, are back this time around only a year after the release of the first game, so there will be a lot of similarities as this one is more of an expansion on the original with some attempts and new and interesting mechanics. Whereas the original Budokai only covered the Saiyan saga through the Cell Game saga, Budokai 2 takes the game through the rest of the series all the way to the end by including the previously absent Buu arcs into the game. This comes with the benefit of many of the most popular characters and transformations from the Buu sagas like Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Majin Vegeta, and of course, Vegito. Unlike the original though, Budokai 2 does not feature any cutscenes to tell the story. Moreover, it doesn't even tell the same story at all, but I'll get to that in a minute. Just like the last title, Budokai 2 released first and foremost for the Sony PlayStation 2 and then followed up with a GameCube release a year later. Both versions are nearly identical this time, however, with the only differences being a few additional difficulty settings and costumes to unlock. For this video, I've opted to cover the PS2 version as it was the first release of Budokai 2 for the public to purchase, making this the version more people would have experienced. Also, I've never owned a GameCube before in my life, so this version just felt more familiar to me. I talked a lot about how important the original Budokai was to a lot of fans due to its ability to tell the story of the series in a way where people could experience a version of it all the way through, or at least through to the Cell games. So I was kind of expecting this game to follow up on that same premise, but just extend the courtesy to the whole series this time. I knew going in that the elaborate cutscenes weren't going to be around this time due to seeing that in my research for the first game, but I was still expecting this one to hit all of the same highlights we've come to expect, but with the added Buu storylines. So, how does Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 tell its story? Let's get into it. When I was talking about Budokai 1, I had a lot of positive things to say about the high production value of the cutscenes. The development team really went above and beyond to animate and deliver a bullet point CG movie of the main events from the anime throughout the first game. The issue was that doing so with such an emphasis on those cutscenes took too much attention from the other aspects of the game, which left a lot of the other offerings to feel underwhelming and undercooked. So the way Budokai 2 decided to rectify this issue is by just removing it outright. As far as I could find, there's not a single cutscene in this whole game except the intro video. Even the story mode has been replaced in its entirety with a brand new take on how to play through the events of the anime storyline. And boy is it something. What we have is a whole new game mode called Dragon World, wherein a series of events parallel to but not replicative of the events of the main series occur. As you can see here, they've done away with the chapter listings and replaced it all with a fun little mini-game that resembles a board game. The map acts as a 3D base for the board, and each character is their own little object that gets moved around the board as the game progresses. Like a little player piece you'd see in Monopoly or something. Scattered throughout the map are these interesting little objects we can try to get to and grab before our opponents can. Sometimes we even have to dig to find them, and I mean literally dig, as in each time your character lands on a space, they can press square to dig on that space and see if anything has been hidden there. Which the game does not tell you, and I did not figure out until I was over halfway through my first run of Dragon World. These objects range in what they could be from item to use in upgrading or customizing our characters, power boosts for the minigame itself, zenny to spend on the in-game shop, or just a straight up Dragon Ball. The game is played in turns. The player gets a turn and then the enemy gets a turn. In your turn, each of your characters receives one move that they can use to progress across the board. Later on, Goku's character receives an additional move letting him move 2 times in one turn. Goku's character is the only character to receive this, with one exception later on. The same is true of character models. While all of the characters on the board are just little game pieces, Goku gets his own fully animated 3D figure that runs around the board, which again only has one exception later on. I'm not really sure why they did it this way, but they did. Right from the get-go, the player can choose at least 2 characters to use on the board at once, and they don't in any way have to make canon sense. For instance, you can throw adult Gohan on the board during the Saiyan saga and just play with him if that's what you want. Which isn't a bad idea because he can get upgraded pretty quickly. The characters you're allowed to choose are limited sometimes, like not being able to pick Vegeta if he has to be an enemy on the board. Of course, when you end up colliding with one of the enemy board pieces, conflict will ensue. Oftentimes there will be a little dialogue exchange between the characters, depending on if it makes sense canonically.
You're Kakarot, aren't you? What have you guys come to this planet for? What are we here for? We came for the things you call Dragon Balls. After we kill everyone on this planet, that is. Lend us a hand, would you, Kakarot? What are you going to use the Dragon Balls for? That does not matter. Come with us and join Master Frieza. So this Frieza guy's your boss, huh? I would never join anyone like that. And what's more, my name is Goku.
And when two characters that would not have ever fought canonically end up facing off, a short piece of unvoiced dialogue appears and then the fight commences. I honestly think the whole mechanic is kind of neat, and it makes this DBZ game feel super unique in that it offers an experience you can't find in any of the other games. Because of the way Dragon World is structured, the developers opted to tell an Elseworld variation of the events from the main series. The story here is still very similar, but it does do a few things very different to offer a unique telling all its own. So let's talk about what makes the story of Budokai 2 so unique.
You guys get off of Earth right now! Otherwise, you'll answer to me!
It's sort of a joke in the Dragon Ball community that we fans have played through the exact events of the series like a million times across the different games, but in this instance, that isn't quite the case. The story opens on Earth with the arrival of Raditz like normal, except Nappa is with him. No Vegeta this time, like at all. So we're tasked with racing Nappa and Raditz to the Dragon Ball, or taking them out before they can reach it. Of course, they'll be spawning Cybermen the whole way as well. Goku doesn't die here though, and he's able to overcome both Raditz and Nappa. Following that, rather than ever going to Namek since there was no need, Frieza, Recoome, and Captain Ginyu come straight to Earth to find the Dragon Balls here. Weird, I know, right? But Goku fights them all off here in the Arctic one by one, then chases them to Namek from there, where Vegeta finally shows up as a villain, but way later than he did in the show. Namek is actually one of the most, if not the most normal arc in the game. The Namek level progresses pretty much like you would expect. Vegeta starts as a villain until we beat him and we unlock him as a hero against Frieza. Then we work our way through Recoome, Ginyu, and ultimately face off against Frieza. Make sure you beat Frieza with Goku and not someone else, because you'll be forced into using Goku more than any other character throughout the game, and if you don't unlock Super Saiyan right there by beating Frieza, you won't unlock it via progression at all. But you will unlock the other forms, and they will be unusable to you without the initial transformation. And as the enemies get harder, you'll be sorely missing that ability. Although you can probably just go buy it in the shop, I didn't think to try that. But since I beat Frieza with Vegeta, I got Super Saiyan for him a little bit early, which is cool.
Let Frieza or anyone else come at me. During that last battle, my Super Saiyan powers were awakened.
Are you sure about that, Vegeta? Or have you just become so terrified that it is affecting your sanity?
Go ahead and laugh while you can, because standing before you is that which you have feared most, Super Vegeta!
I've talked before on the channel how I like to main Vegeta in my DBZ games, and I tried to do that as much as possible here too. So eventually we beat down Frieza and move on to the Android arc. So far things look like they did in the show. We've got old Dr. Gero as the first bad guy, just like in the series, except for some reason he's got his own army of Cybermen. One very odd decision is the omission of Android 19. Try as I might, I can't think of a reason not to have included him here. They have other less important characters than 19, and 19 makes way more sense to be here given that he was the demonstration for Vegeta's Super Saiyan transformation. Not to mention his fight with Super Saiyan Goku is easily one of the highlights of the Android saga. Instead, we just get a litter of Cybermen. I can't help but feel like this was a bad move, and it's not like his character would have been all that hard to include. Once we beat Gero, the other androids appear as you would expect, 16, 17, and 18. I guess you call them cyborgs if you want, but I'm so used to calling them androids at this point, I'm just sticking to it.
Well, if it isn't Vegeta. I was hoping it was going to be Goku.
What? I'm going to turn you into spare parts, you toaster!
We run a few battles against these guys, and suddenly, something happens.
My name is Cell. I am an android created by Dr. Gero. Thanks to you, I was able to absorb 17 and 18 and attain my perfect form. I'm so grateful.
In this timeline, Cell gets the jump on 17 and 18 right away and achieves his perfect form. meaning from here, it's all a matter of carving through his Cell Juniors to get to him. Again, this progresses as you would expect, but there's no Teen Gohan. Just adult Gohan, so weird. I just beat him with Goku instead, which is the way the game intended actually, and again, that's odd. I can't figure out why adult Gohan was selectable from the start, but Teen Gohan wasn't. Even weirder is that Teen Gohan is in the game. Like, he's a character and you can unlock him, but in order to do so, you have to beat Cell in Dragon World during the second Buu stage as adult Gohan. Shouldn't it be the other way around? I feel like Teen Gohan should have been selectable from the start and you could unlock adult Gohan by beating Super Buu or something. I don't get it. Either way, we beat Cell and finish this stage. We then fast forward to the Babidi arc now, where Goku has to fight against the Supreme Kai. Right, so they bothered to include his character, but not Android 19? Either way, this is where things start getting really weird. We beat Supreme Kai, and Babidi appears with Deborah, as you'd expect. Vegeta gets turned into Majin Vegeta, and all seems normal. Then all of a sudden, this happens.
Oh, have I been brought back to life?
What is this?
Majin Cell and Majin Frieza is not something I ever thought I'd see. And actually thinking about it, what a really cool concept too. Although they don't do much with it besides use it as an excuse to have these characters as pieces on the board throughout these arcs. No matter, Goku races to Buu's pod to destroy it when all of a sudden Babidi teleports himself and his minions to what I think is another planet? I'm not sure actually. This is where we have to defeat Deborah, Majin Vegeta, Majin Cell, and Majin Frieza. Oh, and of course, before we can even get to that point, Buu hatches. This whole area feels more like filler to me than anything, but we can have some very cool battles here, including our multiple fights against Majin Vegeta.
Vegeta, cut it out! This is really not the time for us to be fighting!
Stop your blabbering, coward! I won't let you squirm your way out of this. I've waited too long!
Eventually, we have to go confront Buu for a few rounds until everything changes yet again. We're now placed on a board inside the hyperbolic time chamber, but Gotenks is a playable character now, which is honestly really cool. He can go straight to Super Saiyan 3, and he's a really powerful character too. Of all of the underutilized characters throughout the series, Gotenks is easily top 3. The usual suspects are back on the board again too, Frieza, Cell, and Super Buu. So you would think it's a matter of working our way through them all. Except...
I like your head! I think I'll take it! What?
I wish I'd have gotten to fight him while looking like that, but right after he absorbs Cell, he absorbs Frieza next, and looks like that instead. Fighting Frieza Buu, we see that they even bothered to do a voice file that made Super Buu sound like Frieza.
Saiyan? This guy smells like a Saiyan!
This game is actually wild. After a few battles, Buu absorbs Gotenks as per usual, and we transport back to Earth on a new board. We're in a city now, and Buu absorbs Gohan. We're pretty much back to parallel with the original timeline now, which means Supreme Kai gives Goku the Potara earrings, and we meet up with Vegeta to fuse. Finally, we get to see one of the most iconic yet short-lived Dragon Ball characters ever made fully realized. Vegito is so overpowered in this game too, and finally getting to play as him felt like such a payoff by this point in the mode. Not to mention, he is that exception character I was talking about before, where you can have 2 moves per turn and he gets his own 3D model like Goku had. We're nearing the end of the game here, but we do get a solid few battles as Vegito to knock Buu around, and like I said, it's really satisfying. It's not over just yet though. After beating the absorption right out of Buu, he reverts to his Kid Buu form and we teleport to Supreme Kai's planet. And look, the Z-Sword is even back there. That's cool. This begins the final battle. We're all in and the usual suspects are put back on the board. Frieza and Cell will be hopping around trying to get in our way the whole time we play this section. Normally I predict this section would be a lot easier, but given I still had not unlocked the Super Saiyan ability for Goku, and as such could not use Super Saiyan 3 against Kid Buu, meant it was all a pretty hard ordeal to handle. Cell Juniors are back being a nuisance again too. You may have seen a few things on the different boards you've got questions about, so let me talk about them a little bit before we wrap up the story. Mr. Popo is often scattered around various places across the individual boards, and by landing on his space, he will use the carpet to teleport you to different part of the board, which might sound useful until you realize that you can't pick where he puts you, and you don't know where he'll put you until you do it. So it's always a little bit of a risk hitting one of his spaces, although sometimes it is necessary.
Alright, you wanna go at it, you piece of trash?
The spaces with the little half-heart icons next to them symbolize that if you have a fight on that space, then both players will rapidly lose health throughout the battle automatically. And the flame with the down arrow means you'll rapidly lose energy instead. Then there's a space that starts you with no energy, and one that just halves your HP from the beginning of the match. So just be aware of the spaces you are going on the board before you land on one that hands you a fat L because you weren't paying attention. Back to Kid Buu, it took me running between both Vegeta and Goku to chip his health down, but hey, that's accurate to the show at least. By cornering him with each character, I just swapped them and ate a few losses until he gave out and I won. If you collected all of the Dragon Balls throughout the mode, then you can make a wish here, which I had used on wishing for the Babidi spaceship mode. And given that the breakthroughs are a lot more useful in this game than they were in the first one, it may actually be worth it to play through the Dragon mode to collect the Dragon Balls. While I'm talking about this now, let me just say that this is such a massive improvement over the last game. Collecting the Dragon Balls in this game is actually fun and feels like a part of the experience instead of a grinding waste of your time. Being such an important aspect of the anime, I'm glad to say that this game actually figured out how to make collecting Dragon Balls somewhat fun and interesting. It may even be the first Dragon Ball game to do so. And that's the Dragon World mode for Budokai 2. It's got an enormous amount of replayability too, since you can always replay it with everything you've unlocked, making it all so much easier. Like beating Raditz down with the Super Saiyan 3 Goku for instance is pretty funny. Not to mention the allure of seeing how many things might play out a little differently. Like maybe in your second run you'll fight Cell Buu instead of Frieza Buu, or try beating Super Buu without fusing into Vegito. There's a ton of possibilities here for how playthroughs could vary, so they really nailed it with this one. I'm glad to say that the Dragon World mode is a successful attempt at trying something new with how a Dragon Ball Z game tells its story. Now what would a Dragon Ball game be without a World Martial Arts Tournament mode? Just like in the first game, Budokai 2 lets you play through a series of randomized tournaments against various characters from across the game in order to win and walk away with a grand prize. There's very few real changes to the mode overall. It still functions exactly the same with the same rewards for winning. Returning again are the 3 different categories which act sort of as difficulties, those being Novice, Adept, and Advanced. Once again, the player is only given the Novice mode by default and must finish each mode at least once to open the option of getting the next category, which is once again purchased through the in-game skill shop. The prize Zenny is identical to the first game. Upon winning, the player will receive 10,000 for Novice, 30,000 for Adept, and 50,000 for Advanced. All of which is pretty standard practice from what we've seen so far, and with each progressing match, the AI will get more difficult as well. So it's a good thing you can do edits and customizations to your character that give you an edge, but I'll get to that in a minute. Once you've gotten what you want out of the World Martial Arts Tournament, we've got a brand new hidden mode to play with too. Now Budokai 1 had a hidden unlockable mode, but I was pretty critical of it. I thought the last game was not nearly polished enough to warrant whatever time they expended to create and implement the hidden mode called The Legend of Hercule, and that the mode itself wasn't fun or interesting enough to justify its own existence. This time around, however, I did find Budokai 2 a little more polished overall, and everything seemed to function well enough that a little bonus mode didn't feel quite so unjustified. Not to mention, this new mode is better too. Babidi's Spaceship is a very thematically appropriate game mode that fits right in with Budokai 2's heavy Buu era focus, and winds up being far more fun and interesting than the previous hidden mode. The mode shows us a depiction of Babidi's ship, resembling very closely the ship's design from the manga itself, with multiple levels to work through. Each stage features a different challenge for the player to overcome. Stage 1 is arguably the most simple. You're pitted against an opponent, and every time you beat him, he gets back up stronger than the last time. The more times you defeat that opponent, the larger your reward will be. I tended to average about 5 or 6 victories before I finally took an L. Stage 2 is totally different, as you're tasked with surviving against an onslaught of attacks from an invincible enemy. The longer you survive, the better your reward, but this tended to be the hardest mode for me, as I struggle as a defensive fighter typically. Stage 3 takes the previous mode and inverts it. Now you're on a timer to see how many hits you can land before it runs out. I was much better at this mode. The AI is great at defending, so you just gotta be efficient with block breaking and landing combos that maintain a flow. Finally, Stage 4 is easily the simplest of them all. You're put once again on a timer and have to see how many ki blasts you can bounce back towards your opponent. Deflecting them doesn't count, you've got to time your block and hit them back. I've got the hang of this one pretty quickly, but it got old really quickly too, and I was just sick of it after a few times. So what are the rewards I've been mentioning for completing these tasks? Well, the way the mode is designed is actually uniquely catered to how Babidi hatched Buu's pod in the series. The more fights he can feed from, the more Keely energy gets fed into Buu's pod, which means depending on your performance on any one of these stages, you will be rewarded with a certain number of Keely, which goes straight into the Keely meter on the left. At certain points as the meter fills, you will unlock new items, abilities, and even full characters. Pretty much everything related to Babidi, Buu, or the Majin characters comes from earning Keely energy points in this mode. All of this culminates into what I found to be a pretty fun game mode to play with. At first. The truth is that it just takes way too much time to earn these points. By the time I got a quarter of the way through, it was starting to feel like a grind already. And at some point, it starts to feel less like a game and more like a chore, which is never a feeling you want to elicit from a video game. Even so, it's still a significant upgrade from the previous game's hidden bonus mode. Speaking of improvements, let's talk about Budokai 2's in-game skill shop. Instead of going to Mr. Popo to buy things, we'll be heading over to Capsule Corp to buy them the right way, and it's just a more appealing and rewarding system this time. First and foremost, since you find the Dragon Balls in Dragon World, you don't have to waste away hours of your life trying to grind the shop to get a single Dragon Ball at random. Not to mention the availability of items is now much better, with more options. It helps a lot that you earn money through the Dragon World mode too now, because it means you don't have to just replay the World Martial Arts Tournament on repeat to get the zenny you need to buy items. These might sound like some small little changes, but I cannot elaborate just how much of a difference they make to the overall quality of the game. Plus, there's actually a little exploit you can abuse to max out all of the items in just a few minutes if you want. Then of course, if you've got a friend over and just want to go for some good old-fashioned 1v1, Budokai 2's duel mode lets you go up against a friend with whatever characters you want, with whatever settings you want, on whatever map you want. An absolute must-have for any fighting game. But something new that's pretty cool is the added feature of making the game fight itself. You can actually select the characters and let the computer battle it out against itself to declare a victor. It sounds like it'd be boring, but I kind of enjoyed running the different scenarios on this one. Then there's one last mode you can use to set the attitude of your opponent. and just train to get combos and attacks down better if you want to improve your game before tackling a difficult game mode. These are all of the different game modes of Budokai 2, and I feel confident in saying that it's a pretty excellent selection. So how about the gameplay itself? Has that improved at all? While not a lot, it has improved in some very meaningful ways. This is very much the same kind of game as Budokai 1 and feels very nearly identical to it in a lot of ways. That said, there are a much higher density of attacks, skills, and items to play with this time, resulting in what feels like a more dynamic and all-around larger gameplay experience. That said, I feel like the single greatest improvement comes to the transformations. In Budokai 1, the transformations, particularly the Super Saiyan transformations, were so difficult to maintain during a fight, and the boost it offered felt so insignificant that even bothering to use it just seemed like a complete waste of time. It drained your energy insanely quickly, and it seemed like if you even took one wrong hit, it would shut down. This time, the forms drain far less energy and hold through much more punishment. Even the Super Saiyan 3 form, which drains the most energy the fastest, manages to still feel exciting and rewarding to utilize at the right time. It can feel hard to tell just how much of a power boost it is sometimes, and it's definitely not like a game changer during combat, but being able to go Super Saiyan during a fight feels so necessary to fulfilling that Dragon Ball Z fantasy for the player even on a visual level, that its correction in this game is perhaps one of its single greatest improvements. One of the more questionable decisions, however, was the choices the developers made for their character roster. I was pretty critical of Budokai 1's character roster for choosing to include some seemingly derivative characters while choosing to omit some characters I'd have considered more important. Well, although that issue isn't quite as egregious this time, it is most definitely still present. All of the big names are back, of course, Goku and the Z Fighters, Frieza, Cell, etc., and we of course have some of the Buu arc major players coming in to join the roster. Buu in his 3 iconic forms, Deborah, Videl, Goten, Trunks, who obviously bring with them Gotenks, which fusion in general being a new mechanic brought with it a variation of the characters that were honestly sort of a waste of time. Did we really need Tiancha and Gokul to be in this game? There's a time for joke characters, but I would have probably enjoyed their inclusion a bit more if we weren't missing some major players like Android 19 or Zarbon.
Merging with Mr. Satan would give me such a small boost, it might as well be nothing.
You're telling me they had time to program the Great Saiyaman, his own character, with his own moveset, but couldn't bother to throw Zarbon into the Namek Saga? I get they were pulling back on the non-Buu arcs to focus on giving a Buu-centric DBZ game since Budokai 1 didn't have any of this, but it still feels like maybe it wasn't to the game's benefit. I mean, are we better off having Supreme Kai be a character, but not having Birder or Jeice? I mean, some of the new inclusions were really cool. I liked having Videl and Hercule come back, and to be honest, at least they let the Potara fusion work on Supreme Kai to become Kibito Kai. There are a lot of characters here, and there's a decent amount of things you can do to play with them and enjoy the whole experience, but it does feel like there were some characters who didn't need to be there, and some characters that did. I know I keep complaining about Great Saiyaman, but Adult Gohan literally has a costume variation with him in his Great Saiyaman outfit, in addition to having Great Saiyaman be his own character. Meanwhile, both Frieza and Cell only get their final forms to play with. That's it. So once again, it just felt to me that they were all over the place with their roster selection is all. Something else to note is that the Japanese release of Budokai 2 actually received extra content that the Western release didn't see. These extras included a brand new mode for the World Martial Arts Tournament called the Cell Games Rules, which is really just the advanced bout, but where fusions are allowed. An additional overall difficulty level called the Z difficulty, an extra costume for Frieza that makes him look like his son, Kuriza, and an entire extra level in Dragon World. Some of these features would eventually cross the ocean to the West for the GameCube release, but PS2 users were just out of luck. Even still, Budokai 2 is utterly stuffed with content, and there is zero doubt that fans of the franchise will have plenty to play with here. I'd call Budokai 2 a triumphant improvement over its predecessor in pretty much every single way. Not only does Budokai 2 offer several very unique things you won't find in other games, like the different Buu absorption variations, unique fusions, and of course, an elsewhere plotline through its dynamic Dragon World mode, it also offers better gameplay, better game modes, more variety, and an overall more polished experience. I can remember the day I first saw Budokai 2 on the internet so many years ago. I must have been maybe 9 years old. The image of Vegito and Kid Buu in the background. I knew I had to have it. So I asked to get it for Christmas, but instead I got Budokai 3. Which, I'm not complaining, nor did I complain then. That's one of the best DBZ games ever. Even still, the fact that I never played this has always kind of lingered in the back of my mind. I often wondered what this game was like, what I didn't see back then. After the HD collection came out and didn't feature this title, I assumed it must have been a flop. So it's a little strange that after playing it, I can not only see so much of the DNA that would make up the threequel, but can say with absolute certainty that this game is better than Budokai 1 in pretty much every way. I imagine the reason they chose to remaster Budokai 1 instead of 2 is because of the extensive cutscenes we saw throughout that game, and while those are good, I think the Dragon World in this game is actually more fun and more valuable than those cutscenes were. I can honestly say that I really enjoyed my time with Budokai 2, and while it had its occasional downfall, it wasn't half as infuriating as its predecessor was to play. If you're a big fan of the series, and hoping to find a fresh and fun way to re-experience the series, then I would far sooner recommend Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 over its predecessor. Alright, now it's time to talk cover arts. As these older games were wont to do, Budokai 2 released with 3 different cover arts across the 3 different regions it launched in. So I'm going to show those 3 cover arts on screen now. I'll be honest, this is kind of the hardest one of these I've done so far, because all of them are pretty well designed, and all of them have some things that I don't like. I do want to say, for once, I actually really like all 3 of the options a lot. That being said, right away, I see something I don't like, and that's the extreme usage of Goku. These covers are using Vegito to demonstrate that he is in the game, set it apart from the first game, and declare that Buu content is actually in the game. Smart move, I'm on board with that. However, both the EU and JP covers surround Vegito with both Super Saiyan 1 and 3 Goku variations. From a marketing standpoint, I do get it. He is super marketable, and both of these forms are as well. However, it really sucks that it's all just Goku everywhere. I like that the US version throws Gotenks in the mix, since he's repping the iconic Super Saiyan 3 transformation and he's a cool character. Behind everyone is Kid Buu as the clear overarching villain. Goku is in the background, but at least there is some restraint here on his character as it shows him in his base form with the Spirit Bomb. That's relevant to how they actually beat Kid Buu, so I like it. I feel like the logo is most legible here as well. The leaning on the off-white color and the cleared palette background for the logo to pop is very smooth. I like what the EU case has going on as well, but once again, it feels a little too busy for my taste. The logo is less legible this time, and the intensity of Vegito's character feels sidelined to the multiple Gokus around him. I feel like I can confidently say this is the weakest of the 3. I do like the explosion of pink from Kid Buu's character and the glossy look of the logo. As for the Japanese cover art, it's my favorite design-wise. I just hate that it's Vegito with 2 Gokus again. I wish it had been this exact design, but with Vegito and Super Saiyan 3 Goku where he is, but replace Super Saiyan 2 Goku with Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta. That way, it amplifies the symbolic gesture that Vegito is the combined might of those 2 heroes and expands the recognizability of the characters on the cover. Yeah, like that. Overall, I'd say the Japan and US arts are tied. As for the music, it's similar to what we heard in Budokai 1, but better. Way better, actually. I think there's one or two tracks that just got straight up reused from the first game, to be honest, but I'm really feeling like these tracks are a major improvement over the first game. The whole soundtrack is just a much more realized execution of a lot of the ideas the first game was trying to achieve. The hybrid electronica rock sound the first game seemed to be chasing sounds far more natural and fleshed out in this title. All of the legal and plagiarism issues revolving around the Budokai 1 soundtrack didn't plague this one quite as much either, as it feels like Yamamoto was coming into his own this time. I feel like these tracks sound much more original and authentic than they did in the first game. There are some standout tracks here that amp you up to get into the combat, and it makes a great audio backdrop for the whole experience. Somehow, Budokai 2 was received overall just slightly worse than the original, which makes no sense to me. I went and read several of the reviews from the time, and pretty much every review agreed that this game was a definite improvement over the first. So what the hell? The Metacritic for this game clocks in at 66%, just 1% below Budokai 1, and I can't figure out why. The common consensus seemed to be that this game was an improvement, but just not enough of one. If someone were to ask me which game I thought was better between the two, I would tell them this one every single time.
Bobbity, magic! What are you talking about?
Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 took all of the gameplay ideas from the first title and then refined and expanded them. It's a far more enjoyable and less frustrating experience. And on top of everything, it brings with it an incredibly unique and interesting take on how to play through the story beats of the series it's adapting. Dragon World is a really creative addition to the game that feels far more immersive and interesting than anything we've seen in a Dragon Ball game so far. Although I did find the character roster once again overall lacking and featuring some questionable inclusions, not to mention that although Babbidy's spaceship is a far better bonus mode than The Legend of Hercule, it still felt a little lacking and got old far sooner than it took to complete it. I was honestly expecting to finish this game with the feeling that it had nothing to make it worth trying over the other games in the series. But I can honestly say that if you're a pretty hardcore fan of the series, and you missed out on this one like I did, then there's definitely some fun to be had here, and it might be worth it to go grab a copy and spend an afternoon or two just having some fun in Budokai 2's Dragon World. It might not be the best Dragon Ball game out there, but it's definitely one of the most unique.
Why you? What have you done? Vegeta and Kakarot have been united, so I guess that makes me Vegeta. No, I guess it makes you dead.
Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 is thought of by many to be one of the best Dragon Ball Z games ever made. From the way it handled its story mode to the massive selection of different ways to engage with its content, Budokai 3 remains a fan-favorite DBZ game even to this day. Released on November 14th, 2004 in North America, December 3rd in Europe, and February 10th in Japan, Budokai 3 maintains the series' trend of releasing 1 year apart from previous entries, and surprisingly, Budokai 3 managed to deliver an immense amount of improvements to the overall formula within that very short development time. Whereas Budokai 1 only covered from the Saiyan Saga to the Cell Game Saga, and Budokai 2 skipped very quickly over all those prior sagas to focus mainly on the Buu-centric sagas, Budokai 3 delivers a game that pays proper respect to the entire Dragon Ball Z story, while also including plotlines and characters from additional media like Dragon Ball GT, the original Dragon Ball, and even the films like Broly and Cooler. Not to mention a plethora of gameplay improvements that result in a significantly more exciting and rewarding gameplay experience overall, and, unfortunately, a handful of attempted new mechanics that bring with them several new frustrations. Budokai 3 was developed for and released on the Sony PlayStation 2, same as the last two games were, but it was actually the first Budokai game to not eventually release on the Nintendo GameCube. So if you wanted to play Budokai 3 back then, you needed to have a PS2. That said, it was developed on the same engine as the previous Budokai games, building on the framework of what those games achieved, while contributing to and expanding what a Dragon Ball game is capable of. Budokai 3 features a significantly more ambitious and in-depth story mode, a far more versatile character customization system, and easily the most expansive character roster so far to create the biggest Dragon Ball game yet. So let's get into it and talk about what makes the way Budokai 3 tells its story so fantastic. While each entry of the Budokai Trilogy so far has played relatively the same, they've all brought a completely different take on how to portray the storyline from the anime. Budokai 1 emphasized the CG cutscenes as a way of retelling the highlights of the anime. 2 turned the whole thing into a board game-styled experience called Dragon World, with a variation of unique outcomes that could alter how the story was told to a small degree. So what does Budokai 3 do to distinguish itself from the previous 2 games? It introduces a brand new game mode called Dragon Universe, and it's one of the single biggest improvements we've seen in the series so far. Gone is the board game idea, replaced with a fully controllable character who is able to travel freely across the different continents of the Dragon Ball universe's Earth and even Namek. Rather than moving to little predetermined points on a digital board and searching for things on those spots, we get to actually look around the map to find things. We can move slowly or fly at super speeds across the Earth. I genuinely love how this looks and feels to play. It controls exactly as you'd expect it to also. I mean, our character is a little stiff, but it's nothing that can't be compensated for after familiarizing yourself with how it plays. There's 2 maps to explore throughout the game's multiple Dragon universes. The first and most common being the Earth map, and the second being, like I mentioned earlier, the Namekian homeworld planet of Namek. Pre-destruction, of course. This translates to a sort of open world. I mean, sort of. It's really more like a mini-game, but we are free to fly around and explore different iconic locations from the Dragon Ball universe. And you are rewarded for exploration. Although you could just go straight from one objective marker to the other to get to the combat, those who choose to fly around the map and seek out additional content will find plenty of it. Fans of the franchise are sure to love this new feature, as we get to visit all of the cities we hear about or see throughout the series, like West City, the home of Bulma and Capsule Corp, or South City, where the androids first show up. Not to mention dozens of other iconic areas like the World Martial Arts Tournament stage, Korin's Tower, Kami's Lookout, Baba's Palace, Muscle Tower, and even smaller locations like Goku's house or Grandpa Gohan's house. In fact, some locations are only visible on the map when it makes sense for them to appear in the world. Like Hercule City, for example, will only be available to visit during the Buu saga, along with Majin Buu's house and Babidi's spaceship. The Cell saga is the only time when you can see the Cell Games ring, and in the Saiyan saga, you'll be able to visit a descended Saiyan spaceship, which is how you unlock Bardock as a playable character in the game, but only when it makes chronological sense. Dragon Universe is actually how you unlock most of the content in Budokai 3. Sure, you can buy most of it in the in-game shop, which we'll get to later, but a huge portion of this game's characters, stages, and items are literally acquired by playing through Dragon Universe. Obviously, this will be how you search for and discover the 7 Dragon Balls. The collectible Dragon Balls will be scattered throughout the map for the player to find, and depending on which character you're playing, some Dragon Balls may only be discoverable during certain sagas. And of course, the Dragon Radar is an item we can discover by simply exploring the map, and we can then use this tool to find the Dragon Balls much easier, which makes this the most interactive way to acquire them that we've seen in a Dragon Ball game so far. This open world style exploration of the Dragon Ball stories is easily the most content dense and rewarding way of experiencing a Dragon Ball Z story that I've covered so far. There's so much dialogue and so many unique little interactions that can be discovered just by looking for it. Like, how when playing as Vegeta, we can visit Goku's house during the Android Saga, and he'll talk to Chi-Chi about Goku's incapacitated state struggling against the heart virus. Or when playing as Broly, how you can visit Baba's palace, and he just blows it up. That little sequence is totally optional, by the way. You can play through Broly's story and never even see that if you aren't exploring the world. Oh yeah, you can not only play as Broly in Dragon Universe, but 11 different characters, each with their own unique story that takes you exclusively through that character's specific battles from the anime. Some of these story modes are obviously a lot shorter than others, like Yamcha, for instance, or Oob, who have very short story modes, and then Goku and Vegeta sporting the longest stories by far. Let's talk a little bit about what playing through these different Dragon Universe stories looks like. As mentioned before, there are 11 characters to play with, and each character's story mode is tailor-made for them only so far as to play through the battles they were involved with in the series itself. At least for the most part. Goku's story, for example, starts him off right before his battle against his brother, Raditz, which means you can go flying straight towards that confrontation, or you can play around in the world a little bit and have a few interactions before the Z-line really starts, which means you can have interactions like introducing Gohan to Oolong in East City. Of course, before too long you will end up fighting Raditz and starting off the full Z storyline. From here, it plays out pretty much exactly how you would expect it to, save a few surprising absences. From start to finish, Dragon Universe features 5 total sagas to play through, though depending on the character you choose, it may be less. These sagas are the Saiyan Saga, Frieza Saga, Android/Cell Saga, Majin Buu Saga, and the hidden unlockable Broly Saga. On your first playthrough with Goku or Vegeta, you will only have access to those first 4 sagas, which you will have to play through and beat before hidden extras become available to you later. After playing through and beating the main 4 sagas with either Goku or Vegeta the first time, you can play through those events again, but while carrying over the powered-up iteration of your character from your first playthrough, making the second run easier and a little more entertaining. Like beating Frieza with a Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta, or beating Recoome as Super Saiyan 3 Goku. When it really makes a difference, however, is if you find a hidden encounter with Budokai right before progressing to the battle between Vegito and Super Buu, you will unlock an alternate ending path where when you go to fight Kid Buu as you would in your first playthrough, you will instead be told that a dark presence has appeared that needs your attention more than Kid Buu and sent to go combat it. If you're playing as Goku, then Vegeta will send you away to fight Broly, and vice versa. This Broly Saga is where all of the biggest hidden content is. Of course, you can just go to the objective marker and fight Broly, which will complete the game. But if you explore, then this is where all of the GT content is hidden. By roaming around the map and searching, the player can find the Super Saiyan 4 transformation for either Goku or Vegeta, depending on who you're playing as.
What? What is this place? I don't know why, but my body hurts. What's going on here? Yes! My head is throbbing! Feels like it's gonna split in 2! What's happening to me? I can't stop it! I'm losing my mind! I can feel it! I'm changing! Chi-Chi! Goten! Everyone! What is this? I don't understand it. Why did my body transform? And where did I get this incredible power? Oh well, I'll just have to figure it out later. I've got to keep moving.
But if you play as Goku specifically, you can also find and confront Omega Shenron and a climactic final ending to the game. This is the third way to end a Goku playthrough, and it unlocks the Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta fusion as an item for either Goku or Vegeta. From what I saw, the Omega Shenron ending is not available for Vegeta like it is for Goku, but both the Buu and Broly endings are. I actually decided to play through Vegeta's Dragon Universe story last as a sort of bookend. I played through Goku's story a total of 3 times before touching anyone else, and then I played through every other character and ended it in my 2 Vegeta playthroughs. That third Goku playthrough is so satisfying, by the way. Just going through and crushing everyone as a Super Saiyan 4 was genuinely amazing. There is another hidden divergence in Goku and Vegeta's second playthrough I want to cover that can occur a little under halfway through near the end of the Frieza saga.
I can't sense Frieza anywhere. Did he escape?
There's something coming this way.
What? This creature is even more powerful than Frieza. But how?
You must be Vegeta. My brother Frieza told me all about you and your little friends.
While playing through either Goku or Vegeta's story a second time, by exploring Namek, you can unlock an alternate ending to the Frieza saga, where instead of fighting Frieza, you have to fight Cooler. Which is awesome, by the way. I love the old Dragon Ball Z movies, and the inclusion of these movie characters like Bardock, Cooler, and Broly is one of my favorite new additions to Budokai 3. So if you're playing as Goku, you will get to fight Cooler twice while on Namek. Once in his organic form where he can transform into his 5th form, and then one more time as Meta Cooler. This is kind of a loose adaptation of the first Cooler film, but a slightly more accurate adaptation of his second film. I say loose on the first film because Goku wasn't on Namek when he fought Cooler, they were on Earth. Return of Cooler did take place on New Namek though, so that's actually fine. While playing as Vegeta, however, we also get to fight Cooler in all 3 of his forms, which doesn't make sense because Vegeta wasn't even in the first film, but I mean, whatever. While the Cooler content is actually pretty hard to miss on a second playthrough, the Broly saga is a little more hidden since the game never tells you it's there. As for the GT content, it felt like the game didn't even want me to find it. I have no idea why, but both Super Saiyan 4 transformations and the Omega Shenron confrontation are hidden without any markers to indicate they even exist, which I don't understand why they would do that. It's not like they were shy about marketing the GT content. I mean, Pan and Giru are pretty much the first thing you see when you boot up the game, and both Super Saiyan 4 Goku and Omega Shenron are in the intro cutscene. Of course, some of it you can just buy at the in-game shop, but I really feel like they would have wanted it to be easier to find for players in the game. I guess this was back when people loved looking for and finding hidden content in games. I'm not saying this as a criticism, by the way. I'm fine with how they hid it for us to find. I'm just surprised that they hid it so well. As for the other 9 playable Dragon Universe characters, you can get everything you need out of them in just one playthrough, and they're all way shorter than Goku or Vegeta. I mean, hell, Gohan makes up 3 of the 11 characters just by himself. Yeah, Kid Gohan, Teen Gohan, and Adult Gohan all each count as their own individual Dragon Universe story characters, and putting them all together pretty much just takes you through one coherent Gohan Dragon Universe mode. Maybe that was easier than swapping out the character models and skill sets for a single selected character, I don't know. Even counting all 3 of his individual Dragon Universe character playthroughs as one, it's still shorter overall than Goku or Vegeta's. As for the other characters, they're all significantly shorter. You can cut through most of them in an hour or less, whereas a solid Goku playthrough could run you over 3 hours counting exploration and listening to dialogue. I didn't really love any of these other playthroughs though. I understand what they were going for, and their original idea was very ambitious, although too big for them to deliver on. I'll talk about that later. Out of the 11 playable Dragon Universe stories, I only thoroughly enjoyed 3. Goku, Vegeta, and Broly. Oh yeah, you can play through a Dragon Universe story as Broly, and it is amazing. Despite the fact that the developers did model out and program in a base form Broly for other modes, his playable character in Dragon Universe is perpetually in his legendary Super Saiyan form. So we're just flying around Earth as this hulking monster looking to wreak havoc and cause trouble, which we do. He is an absolute menace. I already showed earlier how we can blow up Baba's palace in a bit of optional exploration, but we can also find and defeat Vegeta, Videl, Kid Trunks, Goten, and of course, Gohan. Which, if you can't tell, is just the story progression of Broly's second film, Broly's Second Coming, not counting the Vegeta fight. Even beating Gohan though, the story still ends with Gohan winning, but I mean, they were adapting the film, so it's whatever honestly. Still fun to get to play as Broly in his own little campaign, even if it is short. You can beat the whole thing in roughly 25 minutes, even factoring in exploration and Dragon Ball collection. Another brand new mechanic introduced here in Budokai 3 is a character level system. Every character you play as in Dragon Universe will steadily level up by defeating enemies in battle or interacting with certain optional story moments in exploration. As you can see, there are a variety of different categories you can choose to upgrade: health, ki, attack, guard, arts, ability, and calm. Let me give you a pro tip. Most of these are useless except for the health. I tended to put most of my points in health while throwing a few towards ki, attack, and guard when I had extra. Don't bother putting any in the calm category, as that's probably going to be useless to you. All the calm category does is improve your character's performance when other players input your password code to use your character in Dragon Arena, which is not something anyone is probably doing anymore. But I guess if you want, here's my Vegeta password when I finished with him, have at it. If you're lacking in power and needing a boost to get some extra health or strength to tackle a particularly difficult opponent, each area has these conveniently placed battle points around the map. There's really only ever one available at a time, but they move around the map and the character you face changes depending. Most of the time, it's a Cyberman, but sometimes it's Metacooler or even Trunks depending on where you are in the story. You can farm these battle points as many times as you like to get those points, but I normally only played them once. Still, I love their inclusion, as it gives the player options while giving everything a little bit more of an RPG vibe. I really love how they handled the Dragon Universe mode. Even playing it all of these years later, I still had such a blast with it. Flying around and exploring the world, leveling up your character, seeing all of the iconic locations and landmarks, it's genuinely a must-play for even a passive fan of the series. That being said, I really don't think they fulfilled this concept nearly as well as they could have. Like, this idea is so good, and even their execution of it was right on the mark. It just feels like it needed a little bit more content to really push it over the edge to that point of excellence. Like these continents. The Rocky Continent and the Ice Continent. They are pretty much never used for anything in the main story. Yet they could have been. Like, we could have used this Ice Continent for a Super Android 13 battle, or the Rock Continent for a more appropriate Cooler's Revenge location than Namek. Not to mention, there were just so many great locations around the map I feel could have been used more. And then there were multiple times the game would use a location for an event that I felt was less appropriate than somewhere else that would have been better for it. It feels very obvious to me that this game, as good as it is, was pulled out of the oven too soon. These ideas in the Dragon Universe mode are all just spectacular, and even in their execution very fun to play. But knowing what I know about the amount of content that was cut from the game, coupled with just playing it and seeing how much more was possible with the foundation laid here, it is so clear to me how much this game would have benefited from even an additional 3 to 6 months of development time instead of the sub 12 months of development cycle it got. Even with that said, I still want to make it clear that the mode is excellent as is. And when this dropped, it was by far the best Dragon Ball game on the market. It does nearly everything its predecessors do, but better. Not to mention the plethora of additional content the team brought to the table. Dragon Universe feels like the culmination of everything the series was trying to accomplish so far in a flourishing and immersive package. It's ambitious, exciting, and bordering comprehensive, although not fully achieving it. Flawed as it is, I would still call it easily the best story mode of the trilogy. It wouldn't be a fitting conclusion to the Budokai Trilogy without the inclusion of a World Martial Arts Tournament mode. Once again, this little secondary game mode returns to offer up a way of enjoying the gameplay under the pretense of a tournament arc, wherein each of the characters you've unlocked so far are pitted up against each other in a randomized battle for the grand prize. The developers over at Demps seem to have embraced the philosophy of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it when it comes to this mode, because it has remained relatively unchanged across the trilogy so far. Although, to be fair, it was already working just fine from the start. The eclectic variety of playable characters in Budokai 3 certainly makes playing through the tournament the most fun that it's been yet. Once you've unlocked all of the characters, running through a match and getting to fight such fresh characters like Omega Shenron or Cooler ensures this is a far more exciting experience than the previous two games. Not to mention the option to play as them in the mode, like running through it as Broly crushing the other characters, is just fantastic. As mentioned before, this is very much the same mode as previous iterations, which means we get the same 3 difficulty categories as last time: Novice, Adept, and Advanced, featuring a 10,000, 30,000, and 50,000 Zenny Grand Prize respectively. Then there is a new tournament mode called the Cell Games Rules mode. This is a hidden game mode that has to be unlocked within another hidden mode, which I'll talk about later. All this Cell Games Rules mode does is allow you to play through the World Martial Arts Tournament without any skill restrictions. Normally there are certain skills you aren't allowed to use, like Fusion, but this mode lets you play however you want. This isn't technically new to the series, as it was introduced to certain limited edition re-releases of Budokai 2, but this is the first time it was available upon the initial release of a Budokai game. There are a few little improvements, however. This time the mode is harder overall, so you will very much want to be taking advantage of the items and different customization options available to you, which of course means spending some time in the skill shop. Visiting the skill shop in Budokai 3 is quicker and more painless than ever this time. With more options and a better interface, it's very easy for players to get in and spend their hard-earned Zenny on some fun items to better optimize your favorite characters to your playstyle. It's come so far from the frustration machine that was the skill shop in Budokai 1, and I can't say anything better about this system than that it functions well and aids the gameplay experience. Speaking of your favorite characters, the character roster in Budokai 3 is the best we've seen so far. There are some huge inclusions this time around, most of which you've seen me talk about already. Of course, Great Saiyaman is back once again, but for the first time, I actually don't really have a problem with his inclusion. I mean, I am still frustrated that Gohan alone takes up 4 total character slots on the roster, but whatever, he's a staple at this point, and they did give me plenty of other characters to play with. After that, we've got some love for the original Dragon Ball, with Kid Goku entering the fold as a playable character. And then, as we've covered, GT gets a little bit of love with the inclusion of Omega Shenron. So, the devs didn't go too crazy with the non-Z additions here, but where the best additions come from is the Z movies. Cooler in all 3 of his on-screen forms, Broly in his base and legendary forms, and even Bardock made his way into this one. As you can tell, it's not exactly comprehensive, and despite having these fantastic new additions, there's plenty of notable absences. We don't get some other very cool movie characters like Janemba, Bojack, or one of my favorites, Super Android 13. However, there are some references to the other movies, like Gogeta being a playable character, and Goku having the Dragon Fist as an ultimate ability, as seen in the movie Wrath of the Dragon. While on the subject of missing characters, Android 19 is missing yet again, which is even more surprising than last time. When playing through Goku's Dragon Universe story after beating Frieza, Goku only has one battle before moving straight into the Majin Buu saga. Goku's Dragon Universe completely skips over the Android and Cell sagas, save one battle against Perfect Cell. Which is weird that we don't get to have that fight against 19 as Goku, or train Gohan in the hyperbolic time chamber. Feels like some serious missed opportunities. I mean, Teen Gohan has an in-game character, and the hyperbolic time chamber is a map in the game. What was the reason for this? The only thing I can imagine is that it was a time constraint. While looking into the files of the game, players have discovered that there was quite a bit of content that wasn't finished for the final game. This includes Bulma as a playable character. She has a finished model and even voice lines for her character. Not only that, there are a multitude of characters that were suggested to be in the game by dialogue interacts that were cut from the final game's Dragon Universe mode, including Zarbon, Dodoria, and Android 19. So it looks like at one point they were being planned for inclusion. And not just them, but also Baby Vegeta, Janemba, and Super 17 were all planned to have their own Dragon Universe encounters, as well as be playable characters. Speaking of Dragon Universe, they apparently blueprinted the idea of imagining every character to have a playable Dragon Universe mode for themselves. And although this didn't get very far into development, there is an unused model of Frieza in his hover chair that would have been used for the free roam exploration. So it's safe to say that Budokai 3 has some great ambitions of being a far bigger game than it was, and it just makes me wonder about what this game could have looked like had it been given just a few additional months of development time. Even so, the additional content we did get is awesome, especially the Super Saiyan 4 transformations. Playing as Super Saiyan 4 Goku is so cool, and for the first time, I think in any Dragon Ball game ever at this point, we get to see and use Vegeta's Super Saiyan 4 transformation, and of course, the iconic Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. I know GT is a notoriously hated series, and for plenty of good reasons, but one of the few things I think it did right was this design. Super Saiyan 4 feels like it manages to demonstrate the ultimate marriage of the Saiyan ability to transform, merging their Ozaru and Super Saiyan abilities into one final form. I prefer this to the God transformations of Super by a lot actually from a conceptual standpoint. Back to Budokai 3, we know there has to be a hidden game mode here. In 1, it was The Legend of Hercule, then in 2, it was Babidi's spaceship, and now Budokai 3 is introducing us to the Dragon Arena, and it's interesting. The idea is kind of cool on paper, but playing it feels pretty drab. It's literally just a list of different leveled opponents, and you can use your characters from Dragon Universe to play through this mode and continue leveling them up and making them stronger. That's actually it. The most unique thing about this is that you can utilize a password system to play against other real-life players' custom characters, but it just ends up seeming more like a gimmick than a mechanic. It's not like overly frustrating or anything, more like overly repetitive. After defeating enough enemies, you will eventually trigger what's called a break-in character who comes in and interrupts your battle. Beating that character will then unlock an important item. As I mentioned earlier about the Cell Games mode in the World Martial Arts Tournament, beating Cell when he breaks in on this mode is how you unlock that mode. Then there are a host of other items you can unlock, like the Red Ribbon Army Base as a map or the Sparkling item which multiplies your winnings in the World Martial Arts Tournament mode. It's fun, it's an enjoyable mode to play. It's not all that creative, but it does seem to integrate into the game in a more meaningful way than the past two Budokai games' hidden modes. If you just really loved playing Budokai 3 and couldn't get enough of it, then this mode was probably for you. Aside from that, of course, the duel and training modes are included as standard fare. If you're wanting to run a match against a friend or just make the computer fight itself with characters of your choice, then you can totally do that. And the training mode might even be more useful in this game than in previous titles, since there's several new gameplay additions for the player to master. At a fundamental level, Budokai 3 plays the same as its predecessors, but the changes made here have altered the general gameplay flow quite a bit. Starting off, we've got a totally revitalized key system that functions and flows far better and introduces the new fatigue feature, where if you run out of energy, your character becomes tired and incapacitated for a moment. With these improvements also comes the new transformation system, whereas previously maintaining a transformation meant keeping your ki up consistently, and it was easy to be knocked out of a transformation. Now your energy not only continues to build when transformed, but you get more of it with each transformation. You only lose your form when you run out of energy, and some characters like Broly or Cell don't even worry about that. Transformations have never felt as powerful and satisfying in this trilogy as they do in this game. In terms of combat, there have been quite a few major additions to the blueprint of the Budokai fighting game formula. The first of which I want to talk about being the beam struggle. That moment in the Saiyan saga when Goku and Vegeta each fired out two massive beams of pure colored energy that clashed in midair to create a literal energetic manifestation of their conflict has become engraved as one of the most iconic moments in television history. And yet, none of the multiple Dragon Ball games have been able to let us truly experience that kind of moment. Well, Budokai 3 sought to rectify that in full with the introduction of their new beam struggle. Playing these struggles are completely interactive based on who can rotate their analog stick faster and don't really break up the flow of combat, but rather improve it. Though I'm sure it probably caused more than a few broken PS2 controllers over the years. The new dodge mechanic has completely altered the way you play too, and I found myself a far better defensive player this time around with the ability to focus on keeping my ki up and simply dodging enemy attacks. And once again, this is so satisfying to do. If you want to burn even more energy, then you can choose to counterattack instead of dodge thanks to the new teleportation system. A well-timed counterattack input can quickly teleport you behind your opponent to completely avoid an incoming attack and deal some damage at the same time. You can even counter-teleport your enemy's counter-teleport. It's fantastic, but it does burn a ton of energy, so use it sparingly. Many of these great changes were made in order to accommodate the new Hyper Mode, which allows your character to burn through their energy while making them far harder to knock back, kind of like a Rage Mode. What's the point of this, you ask? Well, it allows you to trigger Dragon Rush. If you feel like I've been praising this game too much, then strap in, because that's about to change. Dragon Rush is the single worst inclusion across the entire trilogy. By far. It's a genuinely awful mechanic that damn near breaks the game. Budokai 3 is a great game, but this single addition just about ruins everything they worked so hard to accomplish with this entry. So, when the enemy enters Hyper Mode, they can get close to you and knock you into a mandatory QuickTime event that forces you to compete against the computer in a guessing game that lasts anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. It's not just the fact that this turns a fighting game into a button press guessing game, or the fact that it totally annihilates the pacing of combat by breaking it up with said repetitive guessing game, but rather that on higher difficulties, the computer will actually just spam it. Like all it wants to do is enter Hyper Mode and force you into a Dragon Rush mode. Not like one time, just repeatedly, until the match is over. This means that if you're hoping for a bigger challenge, then you'll really just be spending every match trying to dodge the computer while they chase you around in Hyper Mode to avoid being forced into a Dragon Rush. Oh, and that's not even all either. They also locked some really cool moves behind winning a Dragon Rush encounter, like Vegeta's Final Flash. Yeah, you have to win a 4-turn game of chance just to see Vegeta do his Final Flash finisher.
Now you're finished! Final Flash!
However bad I'm making this sound to you right now, I promise you it's not bad enough. Budokai 3 is by and large the best one of the trilogy, but this mechanic is like a giant planet-sized sore on an otherwise beautiful work of video game art. There isn't a way to turn it off or anything either, which is a shame. With this one useless mechanic removed, Budokai 3 would soar easily to a near-perfect Dragon Ball Z game, and I just hate to see this one thing be such a catch for enjoying this otherwise phenomenal experience. And it really is just that, a phenomenal experience. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 is, in almost every way, a successful culmination of every idea this series has attempted and more. Sure, it has its downfalls, but so do most games. And the fact that Budokai 3 was developed in roughly a year makes it all the more impressive just how much the developers were able to achieve with this shining accomplishment of a video game. Budokai 3 manages to deliver a better version of everything the previous games attempted while offering up a host of new features to boot. Some good like Dragon Universe, some irrevocably bad like Dragon Rush. Although it without a doubt offers far more content than either of its predecessors, some of the game's promises end up feeling half-baked as a result of short development time. Had the devs been given an extra year to work on the title, it would have probably been one of the best Dragon Ball games ever made, but what we got instead is still a phenomenal DBZ game, with plenty enough on offer to justify a full playthrough for fans of the series. Okay, so let's talk about cover arts. As normal, Budokai 3 featured 3 different box arts for 3 different regions. Just like the other titles, we've got an EU, US, and JP cover art to compare. Taking a close look at all 3 of them, I kinda don't like any of these. It's hard to explain, but all of these feel strange and off-putting. The EU box art feels the most like a normal box art and even resembles the old EU Budokai 1 art, kind of. It also really shows off the newest offerings of the game with Super Saiyan 4 Goku front and center and Broly and Cooler in the background as clear indicators that they are featured in the game. This box art screams this Budokai game is bigger and better than ever. The US box art, on the other hand, I don't know. I'm sort of split on it. The minimalistic approach is kinda cool, and the idea that Goku is right about to punch the customer has a sort of edgy appeal to it, but this execution just doesn't look all that good to me. 50% of the cover is just a fist, while Goku's face is pushed in the corner and the rest of the cover is just black. The logo feels kinda slapped on too. I like the idea here, but not the execution. The Japanese box art, on the other hand, has sort of the opposite problem. There's so much noise on this cover. I love the sort of angled conflict between Goku and Vegeta, but what is all of this in the background? It looks like flames, but also broken glass, but also like some kind of other dimension. I have no clue what this is supposed to be. Maybe I just don't get it, but there's too much going on here. I really don't like this one at all. So, weirdly, I guess I like the EU box art the most this time, which is a first. While covering Budokai 1, I talked about how there is a Budokai HD collection that featured only the first and third games of the series, skipping over the second one entirely. There really aren't any notable differences between the original and the HD re-release. It did allow fans of the series with a PS3 or Xbox 360 an easy way to play Budokai 3 in a widescreen HD resolution. Doing this, though, meant that you would not be hearing any of the original Budokai 3 soundtrack, as they replaced it with music from later Dragon Ball games following accusations of plagiarism towards the game's composer, Kenji Yamamoto. Those accusations aside, the music this time is full of banger after banger. I love the soundtrack of this game. It's got some renditions of tracks from the previous games, but brings out a whole host of even better songs than the last 2 games. Every now and then one of the Budokai 1 or 2 songs will play, and they just sound so weak compared to the newer tracks in the game. While talking about Budokai 1, I brought up how Kenji Yamamoto had been caught writing songs that air dangerously close to plagiarism of other well-known songs, and I did sometimes kind of hear little similarities even in this soundtrack, but I'm not gonna lie, he did seriously up his game for Budokai 3. The production, writing, and energy of every song seems to have improved exponentially from the first game, although there are admittedly 1 or 2 of these songs that sound suspiciously close to other pre-established popular Western songs. Even in spite of all of that, the main theme song for this game stands to my nostalgia-washed brain as one of the best video game themes of all time, and nothing can take that away from him. Budokai 3 expectedly performed far better than the previous 2 games upon its release, averaging multitudes of 7s and 8s from reviewers at the time. Checking on Metacritic shows Budokai 3 with a 77%, a full 10% higher than Budokai 2, and deservedly so. Both IGN and GameSpot gave the game an 8 out of 10, with IGN stating that Budokai 3 was one of the few instances of cel shading done right. Not to mention that it sold over 1 million copies in the US alone after its release. It's safe to say that Budokai 3 outperformed its predecessors in pretty much every imaginable way, and paved new ground for the Dragon Ball games that would follow in its wake. If you haven't been able to tell, I love Budokai 3. Part of that is nostalgia, I'm sure, because this game was a very big and important part of my childhood. I put a ton of time into playing through Dragon Universe and building my characters, making up scenarios, and just loving the game. But now, after going into it fresh, after not only waiting so many years, but also playing through both Budokais 1 and 2 before finally covering this one, I am only more solidified in my previous sentiments regarding this game's quality. I just really hate that the inclusion of Dragon Rush sours the overall experience as much as it does. You really can't even play the game on harder difficulties because it just turns the entire combat system into a minigame of seeing how long you can dodge the ever-spammed hyper modes as the computer attempts to force you into an endless cycle of Dragon Rushes. Outside of that though, Budokai 3 towers over the other Dragon Ball games that released before it. Between the exciting exploration of Dragon Universe, the combat system and graphical enhancements, the much improved character roster, superior soundtrack, and severely expanded character customization mechanic, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 remains not only one of the best Dragon Ball games available on 5th generation consoles, but just one of the best Dragon Ball games ever made in general. So, all of that said, if there's one game you try from this trilogy, make it this one. Thanks everyone for joining me in my extensive retrospective examination of Dragon Ball Z, the Budokai Trilogy. There have been a lot of Dragon Ball games over the years, like, a lot. But these three always stood tall among the others, not only for the impressive groundwork they laid for the franchise itself, but just for being fun and exciting games to play for fans of the series like me. I feel like I can honestly say that I liked each entry better than the last, and that the developers managed to improve their formula with every new game. For now, this is where the story ends. I'm so happy you've stuck it out this far with me. And I'd ask that you like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. More importantly, drop a comment about your experiences with these games and how you felt about my coverage of them. Interacting with you guys is always one of the biggest highlights of this job for me. This might be all for now, but I think we all know there's a lot of other Dragon Ball Z games out there for me to cover, and there's even a whole other trilogy on this system, so stay tuned for that. As always guys, I really hope to see you in the next video, but until then, that's all I've got for you.